All right. All right, Chevra Freilach. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Yud Aleph. We were learning yesterday on Daf Yud Amid Beis, the Machlokes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, as was clarified. That their Machlokes is if a person forgot to make B'dikas Chametz when one should have, which is ideally Or La'arba Asar, and if you didn't do that, then L'Kula Alma, you can do it in the morning of the 14th. You can do it up until the Zmani Surah. Question is, are you allowed to do a B'dikas Chametz if you didn't do it into the Zmani Surah? Which means, what about the second afternoon, the second half of the day of Erev Pesach? What happens if you didn't do B'dikas Chametz? Then should you do B'dikas Chametz on Pesach itself? And what is the issue? As the Gemara explained, that Rabbi Yehuda holds one may not do so, because if you're going to go searching for the chametz, if you find the chametz, dilma asala mechel minei. That's the chashash. Don't look for it. The chachamim, the Gemara says, savri that loy gosrinam. That is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the chachamim. We're going to start today to quote a machlokes that we have in years. That this fear, Dilma Asala Mechel Minei, is mamish reversed, that the Chachamim do have such a chashash, and Rabbi Yehuda does not. So really, it's going to be a stira, both between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. We're going to have three suggested answers on Daf Yud Aleph. We're going to introduce the concept of whether you are Bedili Minei or Deloy Bedili Minei, whether a person is already detached from an item, like chadash is something that everyone knows one may not eat of. So you never eat of it. So you are already detached from it. There's a lesser chashash. Chametz, like we keep on mentioning, being that chametz is permitted to be consumed. About the kosher chametz, but chametz can be consumed during the year. So therefore, the loy, bedila minei, people are not detached from it. So there's a bigger chashash, that dima asala mechle. We're going to introduce and we're going to apply the concept of adam bohul al memoinai. People, when it comes to their money, when they feel that they're losing their money, they go into turmoil, they go into a panic. And ultimately, we're going to have a phenomenal yisoidus when it comes to making gzeiros, the Rabbanon, exactly where do we draw the line in the sand? How much, when do we say there's nothing to be afraid of? And when do we say, no, this is something that we have to be concerned about? And we're going to really fine tune that. On Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, we're going to start the new Mishnah. That's going to quote the machlokes between Tanoim from when may one not eat chametz midrabanan. That's the machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And the underlying of the machlokes, the nukud of that machlokes is that everyone knows that the isur midoraisa for consumption of chametz, and like we quoted Shitas Rashi for balira bal yamatza, is from the end of the 6th hour or the beginning of the 7th hour. Question is, do people get confused when it comes to telling the time? So how much time do we have to separate the person from eating chametz midrabanan to make sure the person for sure won't eat the chametz when one is prohibited to eat the chametz? So it's about how much confusion and time do people normally have. This is when people used to tell the time by seeing where the sun is in the sky. And that's going to bring us into a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. There, the Mishnah is telling us how we interrogate Eidim. So we have the Sheva Hakiros, then we have Bedikos. The Sheva Hakiros is basically to ascertain from each 8 individually the time and the place. What happens if one witness says that what he saw happen during the second hour in the day, and the other witness says what happened during the third hour of the day. There we have a similar question of how much of a discrepancy in time do we tolerate? And ultimately, as we'll begin to unpackage the sugya, we will see that it's also machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. However, it appears that the amount of discrepancy by Sanhedrin is not the same as we have here in Pesachim, and that will have to be reconciled, but that reconciliation will really happen on Daf Yud Beis. Okay, we'll start on Daf Yud Amid Beis. We left off at the end of the second line before the bottom of the Amid. Again, the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is whether a person is allowed to do bedikas chametz once the Zman Isura already kicked in. Chachamim say, of course, if you didn't do it until now, go search your chametz. Right? However, Rabbi Yehuda says one may not do so, and the reason is Dilma Asay Lemechel Minei. So asks the Gemara, Mi Gaza Rabbi Yehuda Dilma Asay Lemechel Minei. V'ha Tanan, we have a Mishnah in the Nachais. The Mishnah there is speaking about what happens regarding Chadash, so grains that grow may not be consumed before the Korban Omer is brought on the 16th day of Nisan, Mimachras Shabbos, the day after Yom Tiv. So the Mishnah says that Mishakara for Omer, that once the Omer was offered as a Korban, now you can eat from this year's new produce. So Yoitzim, people would leave and Umoitzin, and they would find Shukei Yerushalayim, they would find the markets of Yerushalayim, Shehem Aleim Kemach Mekali, that they were already filled with fine flour, with oven-dried grain. Now, my friends, if they would find it right away on the first day Chalamayit, right after the Omer was brought, it's obvious that whatever you're finding in the market was already picked, was already ground, was already dried in the oven, and all of that must have happened before Pesach. It doesn't happen in 1 second. In other words, people were handling Chadash bisman that you may not eat it. Yud Aleph. And that was a fact. However, the Mishnah makes a point to tell us that that was Shaloi Beratzen Chachamim. Shaloi Beratzen Chachamim, look inside the top Rashi, because the Ikala Migzar Dilma Kima Aski Bey, when people will be handling the Chadash, maybe inadvertently, Asalamechel Minei. So clearly you see over here that the Chachamim are chayish dilma asalamechel minei. Now this in itself is already the stira between the chachamim and the chachamim. The Gemara is not going to begin focusing on the contradiction between shitas chachamim Pesachim versus menachos. We're going to start focusing on the stira between Rabbi Yehuda, and we will get to the chachamim in a moment. But just to make it clear that even though this is divrei Rav Meir, but Rav Meir is simply telling us that it was shaloi beratzen chachamim. So really this is shitas chachamim by chadash. Don't handle something that you may not eat. Why? Dilma asala meichel minei. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, there was nothing wrong with it. So here you see the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. You know, it asks the Gemara, how can that be? Why is it that in the Menachos, Rabbi Yehuda has no such fear, and over here in Pesachim he does? Gewaldik. So we're going to have 3 answers. Suggestion number 1, Amar Rava, the Bach amends Amar Rabba, Shani Chadash, Bitoich Shalohi Tartaloi, Ella Alidei Kituv. There's another din, and that din is that when you harvest the grains before the Korban Omer was brought, you may not do it with a sickle. You have to harvest it with a shinui. Kituv means to pluck the stalks by your hand. So when you handle something with the shinui itself will remind you that you may not eat it. Why must you harvest it with the shinui? Not because dilma asala meichel minei. Actually, Rashi tells us that's understood, that's learned out from a pasuk that we have in Parshas Emor. Look inside the Rashi, 3 lines from the top of the Amid. The ha'asur liksar lefnei ha'omer d'chsiv, regarding Omer, that the Omer is reishis ketzirchem ela kohen. That which is offered as a korban has to be mamish, the first of what you harvested. Shehu tchilas liktzira. So b'chlal there's a din that you may not harvest it with a sickle. So since you have to do it with a shinoi, Rashi says, Zachor hu es isor ha'chadash alidei shinoi ha'maisa v'loi asa l'meichal. Gevaldik. Back in the Gemara. So therefore you have to do it al lekitov, so therefore it was Zachor. That's Rava or Rabba's answer. So Amalei Abaya, hold on, I get it. Tinach b'shas ktifa, I get it. We don't harvest it with a keli. You do it by hand, and that taka will remind you. But when they sold in the market, like we said, kemach. Kemach is flour. From what you harvest until you get it into the flour, from what you harvest until you have an oven that it's dried grain. I want you to know we're city boys. But when you harvest grains and they're moist, you can eat them. Well, once it's oven dried, you can't. But what about the tchina? What about the grinding? Nowhere does it say that you have to grind it with a shinoi. What about the harkada? What about the sifting? You might eat it then. So again, Rava says, holy kasha, it must be that just like because of the pasuk Kedeshis Ketzirchem, we know that you have to harvest it biyad, right? Which is shinoi, tchina has to be done with a chayde yad. It can only be done with a hand mill. The harkada, the sifting, can only be done al gab nafa, on the opposite side of the sieve. Everything that you do is done b'shinoi. That's what he's suggesting, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda in Menachos is not afraid of you handling something that you may not eat. We don't say that you might eat it. So the Gemara says, no, I'll prove it to you from another Mishnah in Menachos that there are some types of produce that you could harvest without a shinoi. How will you explain the following Mishnah? Now the Mishnah is speaking about grain that is of inferior quality, thus you should not use that grain as the carbon oimer. And the Mishnah says that since it's anyways not going to go on top of the mizbeach, not even in potential because of its inferior quality, then you can properly harvest it. The Mishnah says, you can harvest, that means with a sickle, with a keli. Base hashalachim, produce that grows from fields that need to be irrigated. Fields that need to be irrigated produce something which is inferior compared to fields that are so fertile, that are so good, that based on the rains it already produces fantastic. Also, certain areas, fields that are in the valley, they also produce grains that are of inferior quality, and you can not only harvest it, you can harvest it without a shinoi. Now there's another nuance. Why would someone want to harvest it if it's chadash? So you should know that when grain is connected to the ground, there is a window. The longer you leave it after it's already matured, the worse it becomes. So there's a financial loss if Chazal would say, leave it on the ground. So not to lose any money, it's already not the best quality. It shouldn't get even worse. You can harvest it, but the Mishnah says koitzrin. You don't have to do ketifa. However, another detail, don't heap it into piles, because that step is why do we have to heap it into piles? It's not going to become less worth if you leave it as is. Handle it at chadash asur. Now, when you cut it, grains, when they're cut, are moist and they're soft and they could be eaten. So you clearly see that wherever we don't have the isur to learn from Reishis Ketzirchem, wherever you could harvest it biyad, you can cut it. But let's go back. According to Rabbi Yehuda, why don't we make a gzeira dilma asel lemichlei? And more than that, so if you're going to tell me that maybe that Mishnah doesn't go according to Rabbi Yehuda, so we will learn in the Menachos and Daf Ayin Aleph that for other reasons Rashi tells us there are other statements made in that Mishnah from which we can extrapolate that Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda, which means the Reisha also follows Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, when a produce that doesn't go on the mizbeach can be harvested biyad without a shinoi, and therefore my ikal meimer. So that taka rejects that this proves the answer of Rava or of Rabbi. So answer number two, and actually the answer number two is going to stand more than the first and more than the last. So Elo Amar Abaye, who was the one that was challenging either his teacher or his chavit. And that's the vart. That's the vart that we already quoted in the beginning. Chadash badal minei. People are detached from chadash. People know that. You're detached from it just because you'll handle it, right? You're not going to come to eat to it. Makes a lot of sense. As much as chametz. Chametz deloi badal minei. Since until this mani surah we eat chametz. So therefore, only over there is Rabbi Yehuda chayish dilma asel meichal. Beautiful. Now, the downside of Abaya is, Amalei Rava or Amar Rava, I get it. It was good for the answer. The Rabbi Yehuda kasha, and now you gave the answer, but you are completely ignoring, but the Rabbanan ad Rabbanan loy kasha, was there not a contradiction? Like we pointed out from the top line in the Amid, I know it's Divrei Rav Meir, but it's more than Divrei Rav Meir, because Rav Meir says that the fact that they found already in the Shukei Yerushalayim everything readied to be sold, it was Shaloi B'Ratzon Chachamim. Why was it Shaloi B'Ratzon Chachamim? The Chachamim allow you to do B'dikas Chametz B'zman Yisura. They don't say that since you handle something else, you're going to eat it, you won't eat it. So why over there were they chayish? And now we have a bigger question. And now you're telling me that Chodesh is Badal Minei. So Avada, you're not going to eat it. So the Gemara says, that doesn't refute the first answer that we gave. We're going to accept the answer of Abaya as far as understanding Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbanan ad Rabbanan Amalei Kasha. Why? This is Achsidish Shavart. By going back to the Mefsayim that we spoke about yesterday, that since you're being boidik the chametz, who atzmai mechazer olav l'sarfai, you're looking for the chametz for what purpose? To find it, to burn it. You are involved in getting rid of it. So you're going to tell me that when you are in that mode, mechal ka'achal minei, in that mode, you're not going to come to eat it. Moidedik. That's the logic of the Chachamim. Now, when it comes to Chodesh, what are you doing? You know that this is something that we may not eat in Eretz Yisrael until the Korban Omer is brought, right? And according to many Shitas, also v'chutz la'aretz. But when you are preparing the new grains to be sold, fakert, you're getting it as close as you can get it to be edible. You're not in the mode of getting rid of it. That's why it was Shaloi B'Ratzon Chachamim. Beautiful. The third answer comes from Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi is addressing Rabbi Yehuda, that Rav Ashi Amar, that Rabbi Yehuda really like kasher. I'll tell you why. Because the Mishnah Menachas, the one that we began here on Daf Yudam and Beis on the bottom, was speaking about kemach v'koli. Flour is not edible. Once you dried the grains in an oven, which is what koli is, then it's not edible. So what were they selling? They were selling items that are not edible. Now, you can bake it. You're not going to go bake it. It's chodesh. The fear is that when you have it in your hand already, you'll forget, you'll take it in your mouth. What you're selling is inedible. So what's b'chlal the problem? That is what we have from Rav Ashi. And the Gemara right away says that Chada Rav Ashi, this word, bedusa or barusa, is throughout. Whenever the Gemara says this expression, bedusa means it's a narishkeit, which is a little bit of an extreme statement to say in Rav Ashi. Barusa is miloshen braisa. Take it outside the Beis Medrash. It's not authentic. It's not correct. Whether it's badusa, whether it's barusa, the Gemara is saying we are completely rejecting this answer. Why are we rejecting this answer? Hatinach mikali ve'elach. I get it. Once you already dried it in the oven, then it's not edible. But how did you get it from harvesting it until you oven dried it? There were many times what you have in your hand is plenty edible. But mikara ad kali ma'ikala meimar. And if you're going to tell me back to the first answer that we have, the chitema al yidei kituv kiderava, no. Rav Ashi is also basing it on the fact that you have to harvest it with a shinoi, right? It has to be plucked by hand. But we already refuted that from the Mishnah that the other Mishnah that we quoted the Menachas, the Mishnah that says that koitzlin beis hashalchen ushu ba'markin. And later the Gemara and Menachas proved that Mishnah, that whole Mishnah is going according to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, ma'ikala meimar. And therefore, Ella Nachamal, the Rav Ashi, is Badusahi or Barusahi. So which answer stood the best? The middle answer, Abaya's answer, right? That for Rabbi Yehuda, Batul Minei, Loi Batul Minei, and then for the Chachamim hold that since by Chametz you're being Machazer all of L'Sarfos, Mechel Ka'achal Minei. Frank the Gemara, B'chol Hecha, right? That the Loi Batul Minei, if it's Loi Batul, you're not detached, which is chametz. So we're saying, Rabbi Yehuda makes a gezerah. No, me goes Rabbi Yehuda. Guys, from here, mamish, until the Mishnah, this is such a gavaldik yisoid of where do you draw the line in the sand? By all gezerahs, just to appreciate it. I mean, you can always argue, how far do you stretch a gezerah? So we're going to give many cases and point out, mamish, that's called drawing the line in the sand. Ad kan, we're not chayish, mikan v'halon, you are chayish. So here's the kash. We're going to go through many dinim over here. A Mishnah and Shabbos, a person may not perforate an eggshell. An eggshell was a gavaldik keli. They had no kelim then. That if you make a little hole in it, right, and you fill it up with oil, the hole will be pumped big and small enough that the oil will slowly drip into something underneath it. We're speaking about a person that has a lamp. The lamp's there is a keli with oil with a wick. And if I were to put an eggshell filled with oil that's perforated on top of my lamp, that oil will slowly drip into the lamp and it's going to stretch the time that the fire is going to burn. Now, what we learned in Masechta Shabbos is that one may not take out oil from that keli, even though it's not directly in the lamp, it's connected to kiboy. There's a big machlekes rishonim. Why exactly is it kiboy? Why isn't this gram kiboy? But let's leave that. The bottom line is that no one is arguing that if you have a reserve keli that is dripping into the current lamp, you may not take oil out. So the Mishnah says that lo yikav adam shem perish al beit. So don't perforate the eggshell. V'yimalenu shemen v'yitnenu mitzad haner b'shvil shetei min hatefes. Why not? Because we are afraid that where were those lamps? Those lamps were generally put on the table where you eat, right? Made of Shabbos. That you need oil during the meal. You might accidentally take some of the oil and consume it with your meal. And the Mishnah says this is true even if it's not in an eggshell, even if the oil, the perforated keli in which you put the oil, which is dripping into your lamp, is made out of cheres, and b'chlal, we know that earthenware becomes slimy and repulsive, and therefore you can argue there's less chance that someone will take oil out of a repulsive keli. No, we are chayish, it's on your table that you might do so. Okay, and now the Mishnah says that Rabbi Yehuda matir, moidedik. Why is he matir? If Rabbi Yehuda, now oil before Shabbos, people are not buddled from oil. And as the Rishonim point out, I know bedikas chametz means that if you find the chametz, you're going to take it in your hand. This oil is not in your hand, but doesn't matter, but it's on your table where you're eating. It's like in your hand. It's called handling it. And if Rabbi Yehuda, who is chayish, whenever deloy badl minei dima asel mechle, why did he not make exait over there by the eggshell? Beautiful. So answers the Gemara another nuance. Over there, mishum chumra the Shabbos mivdal bedilei. I know that during the week people are not buddled from oil, but the chumra of Shabbos itself is a reminder. People are careful. Oh, Shabbos, can I do it? Am I being mechal Shabbos or not? That the delay from Chilul Shabbos is going to be a protection, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda makes no such gezerah. Hold on, we're not done yet. Okay, let's go to Shabbos. The Shabbos ad the Shabbos. Ditanya, Gavaldik, Chazara from all these dinner. Chevel deli. If you have a rope on a pail, shenifsak, that it snapped, and now you have to fix it. You want to use the bucket, but you don't have the rope. The rope snapped. So the Braisa says, Loy yehei koishroi ella oinvoi. Right? Kshira, not shitas Rabbi Yehuda. But kshira is asur midoraisa, according to everyone other than Rabbi Yehuda. A knot is asur. A bow is not asur. Make a bow. A bow is not something shel kayama, and you do that in order for you to be able to use that tail on that Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, not even oinvoi. Now the Havamina is, we already learned Shabbos. We know that according to Rabbi Yehuda, oinvoi and kshira is the same thing. But here the Havamina is that Rabbi Yehuda holds that making a bow is only an Isun Midrabanan. Don't even do that. Koirach olav punda, oy piskia, take either a belt or some sort of garter. No, it's take a garment that you need and use that to wind it around the two edges. You're not even making a bow. You're not even making a bow, and you're using an item that you for sure will not leave there because it's your belt. You need your belt. So it sounds like, again, if we were to hold, which we already know it's not, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that aniva is only asur midrabanan, so he's not even allowing you to make a bow. Why not? Because you might leave it there. He's making a gzeira. But if we just said that Rabbi Yehuda subscribes to the concept that Mishum Chumra the Shabbos Mivdal Bedilei, he shouldn't be so afraid over there. Why is he making gzeiras? So Kasha the Rabbi Yehuda had the Rabbi Yehuda, and furthermore, as the Gemara points out, Kasha the Rabbanan had the Rabbanan, which Shabbos by the eggshell, right? The Chachamim say that you may not use such a oil. You can't put it in that eggshell. Why? Because you might consume it. They don't make exeda, and here they allow you to make a bow. So we have to, every case is a case, and the Gemara spells it out. The Rabbanan like kasha, guys, the second wide line answers the Gemara, because shemen b'shemen michalav. Yeah, I eat oil the whole year round. I eat oil during the week. There's going to be oil on my table. And the oil is not even in the lamp. The oil is in the eggshell above it. There the Chachamim were chayish. Aniva b'kshira loy mechalav. It's so dissimilar. Kshira is asur. Making a bow according to the Rabbanan is b'chlal not a problem. It's not shel kayama, so you can do it. The Rabbi Yehuda like kasha. Now the kasha becomes even stronger. But it says the Gemara, Talmud Rabbi Yehuda lav mishum de gazar aniva to kshira. As we know already, it's not that he doesn't allow you to make a bow because he's afraid you might make a knot. No, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a bow is called a knot. That's it. So what should you do? He gives another solution. Don't even make a bow. But it's not exed. He's telling you don't violate Shabbos. Gemara says, hold on. Now that we gave the Braisa of the Chevel Deli, there is a Mishnah in Shabbos, right, that says Koshrin Deli bipiskia or bipisikia, that you could make a knot if you're using the garter or the belt. Because since you're using your garment, it will not be shel kayama because you're going to have to take it back. Now, we learned in Shabbos what is shel kayama. Does it mean it's 24 hours? Does it mean 3 days? Does it mean 7 days? Whatever it means, shel kayama, if you are using a keli that you need, a garment that you need, it's not going to be shel kayama. Elamai, you can't use a chevel. So clearly here the Mishnah says that the Chachamim allow you to do a kesher. And the Rabbi Yehuda, is matir. Rabbi Yehuda allows you to do it. He allows you to be kosher, it sounds like. So b'chlal, there's a stira there. So the Gemara says, first of all, chevel demai, what type of rope, right, do the Chachamim say you may not use? Ilema chevel da'alma. Obviously, it can't mean a real rope because the Chachamim would make sense. But how can Rabbi Yehuda be matir? But Rabbi Yehuda matir, that's not a stira, that's pashut. How can Rabbi Yehuda? That's one of the lamas as malachas, kesher shel kayamahu. Oh. The vadai osi levatule, if it's not a rope that the balabas uses for other functions, then for sure Rabbi Yehuda would not allow it. It must be that the chevel, right, that the Chachamim say you may not use, and Rabbi Yehuda's lenient is pshita de garde. We learned in Shabbos, it's a weaver's rope. Now a weaver's rope, there are two shittas in the Rishonim. Either it's a very weak rope, you will for sure not leave it on the bucket because it's going to schlep up the water once, it's going to rip. Or again, it's an instrument of the work of the weaver. It's even more than his own garment. He needs it for his work. So when it comes Sunday, when you go back to work, he's going to take it back. Okay. And nevertheless, here, the Chachamim are the ones that are afraid. The Gozru Rabbanan Chevel de Gardi Otu Chevel de Alma, right? And didn't we just learn that when it comes to the oil in the eggshell, the Chachamim make no such a gezeira? No, I take that back. That the status from the Braisa of Chevel Deli, by Chevel Deli, the Chachamim say that you can't make a kesher, and here in the Mishnah says you could make a kesher. So answers the Gemara in Chevel b'Chevel michalaf. Chevel b'Chevel michalaf. So the Chachamim say if it's a rope, never make a kesher. You have to make a bow. Aniva b'Kshira loy mechalfa. Gewaldig. Okay. In other words, even though you're using a chevel from a gardi, but you might confuse it with a normal chevel. And since a normal chevel, if you make a kesher, it's going to be asur midoraisa, so the Chachamim say you can never use a chevel. When it comes to differentiating between a kesher and an aniva, shitas Chachamim, not like Rabbi Yehuda, that a bow is not asur, so there they don't make such example. Now, back here to Abaya. So what was Abaya's premise? That when it's badal minei, which is the case of Chadash, then Rabbi Yehuda allows you. But again, when the Bachemens V'Atnan, second to last line in the Amid, we learned in a Mishnah, guys, this Mishnah is about a Bechor. A Bechor is the firstborn male animal from either a cow or a sheep or a goat that one must give to the Kohen. And if it is unblemished, the Kohen must bring it as a carbon, and it's prohibited to directly inflict a mum on a animal. That's a bechor. But what happens, says the Mishnah, bechor sha'achazei dam. Achazei dam is some sort of blood pressure illness, through which in the times of the Mishnah, the remedy would be to have to blood lead the animal, to have blood leave the animal. Now, when you pierce the animal to have the blood leave, which will diminish the pressure and he'll live, if you make the hole in certain parts of the behemoth, you won't halachically blemish it. But doing that same procedure in other places in the animal will render the animal a balmum. You can't make a bachar into a balmum. So says the Mishnah, afilu humeis, even if you won't do something right now, the animal will die. Ein makizin lo, you may not puncture the vein. Ein makizin lo dam. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. You know, Rabbi Yehuda is afraid that you'll end up making the puncture in a place where you're going to blemish him. Okay, the Chachamim oimrim, no, Yakis, if he's about to die, you can puncture it. Ubulvad, shelo yatel beimum. Just be mindful. So what's the kasha? Look inside the last line in the Amid Nashi. The kasha here is on Rabbi Yehuda, based again on the premise that we left off from Abaya, that v'chol heicha the badal minei loy gazer Rabbi Yehuda. Loy gazer Rabbi Yehuda. So the last line, the gazer Rabbi Yehuda. Atu makim shoysim b'mum. Here Rabbi Yehuda is chai. She makes a gzeira. You can't bloodlet. Afal gav, that's the badal minei that Rashi explains. The kachim hakoil b'dilim mehem is a machlekes. My Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda subscribes to this concept that people are very mindful when it comes to kachim. So again, so your badal minei, if you're badal minei by chadash, Rabbi Yehuda allows you to harvest it, but that's in chachamim. And you don't have to make a shinoi wherever the Torah doesn't demand from you to make a shinoi. And why over here by a b'choir, even though Rabbi Yehuda hakoil b'dilin mehen, Rabbi Yehuda says, lose your animal, let it die. So here you have to know of another nuance. The end of the Amid says the Gemara Hassan by a b'chor mitoich she'adam bohu chavre b'turin tafid alef Amid beis al memoinoi. People, they go into a panic when they're losing their money. So we say Amrinan that ish shadislei b'makim she'ein oisen baymum, very similar by a fire in Shabbos. But sometimes since people are bol amamoinoi, the Chazal say do nothing, do very little, because once you start doing something, you're going to want to do it. You're going to want to save your animal. If you will be allowed to do it, then even though people are buddled from kachim, they're careful not to touch kachim. But here you're going to lose your money. So here, because of Adam Baal Amal Moinai, now everyone
the coin's money. It's not his money.
So first of all, Shlem is the kohen. You gave it to the kohen. What Shlem is asking is, are we saying, according to this interpretation, that this is only for the kohen? What happens if you didn't yet give it to a kohen? If you didn't yet give it to a kohen, maybe the toivas hana is oichet epis, maybe, because you have the right to whom to give it to. But you're making a good point. And that now hold on, everyone subscribes to Adam Baal Al-Mamoinai. Yeah, but the Rabbanan say the opposite, because how do you apply Adam Baal Al-Mamoinai? It's a very funny application. It's not funny, it's Gavaldik. That's the Rabbi Huda is telling you. Adam Baal Al-Mamoinai means that we restrict you more. I'm thinking it's a good dogma to the whole dinam of when there's a fire, how much stuff can you take out of your house? Remember the whole din, you can only take on Mazain for Shabbos. Why? Because if you would be allowed to take everything out of your house, then you're going to end up putting out the fire because of Adam Baal Amomoine. So when they put restrictions, it reminds you. Here he's saying there's a restriction. You can't do it. The Rabbanan say, Kol Shchein, the Eloi Shadis Lei Klal Asalim Evad. Adam Baal Amomoine is a reason not to limit a person, but to allow a person. Now you tell the person, be careful. Don't puncture the vein. The makom, you're making the animal into a balmum. But the Chachamim may know such gezeiron. But we're not done yet. Umi fragt die Gemara Merino Rabbi Yehuda Adam Baal Amomoine. Ve'hatnan. Oh, now we're going to Mesechtes Beitza. So for those of us who already missed Shabbos and Eruvin, we're going to have plenty still of Dinei, Suri Shabbos, and
Beitza Chafalef. We can't mechalik sein behema.
Okay, we learned over here.
Am I wrong? Hold on. Beitza Chafalef.
Okay, we learned to Mesechtes Beitza. Now, what are we learning about over there? You have an animal. The animal has a lot of clumps and mud on its hide, on its skin. And the balabas, in order to take away tsar from the animal, you want to comb the animal. Now, if you were to comb the animal with a normal metal comb, then there's a high likelihood that you're going to make a chavala, you're going to wound the animal. Chavala, drawing blood, is one of the lamates malachas. Oh, so me, Aminin and Rabbi Yehuda, that since Adam Bohul Alma Moinoi, you have to limit what the person does, because if he's going to be doing something to save his money, he's going to go beyond the limits and he's going to end up doing a malacha. We learned in Beitza, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, now there's two different gearses. We're going to read it as it is in the parentheses. There's Mekadrin and Mekatzifin. Mekadrin means using a metal comb. A metal comb, the teeth were thinner and it was likely that you're going to end up wounding the animal. Mekatzifin is using some sort of wooden comb whose teeth were thicker, and therefore there's no likelihood, or there's much lesser of a likelihood that you're going to make a chaval. So Rabbi Yehuda says that ein mekadrin b'yantiv mepnei shuayse chabura avol mekatzifin. You can do mekatzifin, okay? And the Chachamim say nishtaher or nishtahin ein mekadrin v'em mekatzifin. And let's go further. And Vitanya, we learned just a clarification in the Braisa, what exactly is Mekadrin and what's Mekatzifin. Ezeu Kidur, Vezeu Kirtzuf. Kidur is Kitanim. The teeth are thin. And therefore, V'oisin Chabura, right, they can make a wound. Kirtzuf is a comb that has wider teeth, thicker teeth. Ve'ein oisin Chabura. Now it's mamash gavaldik. Here we're saying that Rabbi Yehuda says, don't puncture the animal at all. Because if you'll, even though you can puncture it in a way that you won't make it into a blemished animal, but if you're going to do this, you might do that. Here it's everything reversed. Rabbi Yehuda should have said you can't comb the animal at all, because if you're going to use this comb, you might use that comb. So answers the Gemara no. Hassan over there, meaning by Bechor, the ishavikle, if you will leave the animal untreated, which is really what Rabbi Yehuda ascribes to, the animal is going to die. So what you're doing is an action that's saving the animal's life. That is where Rabbi Yehuda says, make sure you allow the person to do it, he's going to do it quick, and he might end up making a blemish. Over here, by this animal, right, so what? So the animal has clumps in its hide, that has mud in its hide. It's not going to kill the animal. It's about fat. Now, obviously, if we are allowed to, we're obligated not to have the animal in pain. But you're not bohol. So the animal has sad. Over here, if you won't do anything, which is what the Hachamim subscribe to, is sad about. So there's no bohul. If there's no bohul, then Rabbi Yehuda says, then use an instrument that won't make a chavala. We're not done yet. Isn't this gavaldik? We're going back and forth. We're fine-tuning the line in the sand. Now, finally, Rabbi Yehuda, let's come back over here. What's his gezeda? Let's go back to the, because since loy badil, if you're going to handle chametz, you might eat it. Don't handle it. Here you're combing. That Rabbi Yehuda is the one that is not afraid. I know it's not because of bahul, but there is no badil. The loy gazar. So the Gemara says, lechem belechem mechalef. Lechem mechalef means this is particularly correct. The appearance of bread and of matzah in those days were similar. So when you're holding, they were both like a lafa, like what we would call, I don't know, a pita bread. So they're very equal. If you're going to end up handling chametz, not only is it that deloy badal, but it looks very similar to something that you may eat. So there's a greater chashash. Kidur b'kirtzuf is loy mechalaf. And therefore, since these combs are so different, we're not afraid that you're going to end up using a metal comb. And as you can just imagine, all of the Rishonim over here and all the Achronim over here, and what's going to happen nowadays, that chametz and matzah taka does not look alike. Does that affect Shitas Rabbi Yehuda? And it doesn't. That's these rules, that once Rabbi Yehuda, once a Tana makes a gezeda, the gezeda is a gezeda. But the gezeda was made at the end, not only because loy badul, but because the Michael, the permitted and the prohibited are very similar. Many times when you have to figure out why did they make a gezeda here and not over there, you come back to Pesachim Daf Yud Aleph, and here's the yisoidus of all gezedas, when you make it and when you don't. Okay, and now we're moving on to the new Mishnah. And like we mentioned, the side of the coming sugya is that when Hashem says that there is a certain issur that is time related, people can make a mistake in time. How much of a mistake in time can you make? We'll see right over here. Says the Mishnah. Rav Meir Oimer, Oichlin kol chamesh. You can eat chametz the entire 5th hour of the day, and then the 6th hour, which is 1 hour before the Zman Isur Minat Torah, that is the time that sorfin, that you have to burn it. You go straight from Heter Achila to the obligation to burn it, and you have to burn it b'tchila sheish. Look inside the top Rashi. The sorfin b'tchila sheish. The afal gav the chol shah shish is midoiraiso sharia. Make it clear. No one. We're not saying that Rav Meir is telling you when the Isur doiraisa is. Nevertheless, it's midrabanan. Gazur rabbanan Allah. Why? Dilma ta'i, person will make a mistake, the savud, and he'll think regarding the 7th hour, the person will think the 7th hour is still the 6th hour. So if one were to eat chametz on the 6th hour, you might end up eating it on the 7th hour. Now, why didn't you go back another hour? Says Rashi, Shitas Rabbi Meir, Avala Chamishis, Loi ta'i lemeiman ala shvishi chamishis. No, it sounds like Rav Meir holds that people can make a 1 hour mistake. They won't make a 2 hour mistake. And therefore, there's no prohibition altogether on the 5th hour. Guys, we don't paskin that way, but let's begin from the beginning. That's Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, and Rabbi Yehuda, as you can see already, the Aleph from the Amish, but the mitzvah, that this is the way we paskin. And the Gemara is going to speak about that a lot more. And Daf Yud Gimel, who we paskin like, that no, that you can only eat it up until and including the 4th hour of the day. Already on the 5th hour of the day, his lashon is toilen. It's hanging. What's hanging? Look inside the Rashi. Toilen kol chamish. The eina oichel, you may not eat it, because the ta'i, the savur ala shvi'is, shehi chamishis. Wow. At kedei kach. In other words, it can be only it can be the 7th hour in the day already, and you will think it's still the 5th. And if you will be allowed to eat chametz on the 5th hour of the day, then you'll eat it bisman isur doiraisa. So he made it, the isur achila Rabbi Yehuda is not 1 hour earlier from this man shel Torah, but it's 2 hours earlier. But hold on, why not burn it? So Rashi says, you can still have hana. They made a gradual prohibition. You can't eat it, but you can have benefit from it. L'mashal umachal lebehemtoi, abol shishis. Like Rabbi Meir, asur midrabanan gozrina mishum shvi'is. Now, back in the Mishnah, and the sarfin b'tchila sheish. They both subscribe to the same zman of burning it, but they argue when is the zman isur midrabanan of eating it. Now, for those of us who will remember this whole question, whether hashbasa means only by burning, whether you can get rid of your chametz, whether you can eliminate your chametz through other means as well, this Mishnah cannot be used as a source that Rav Meir holds you have to burn it, that Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to burn it. We'll see what their shitas are later, because one thing, just to make that parentheses, l'kula alma, burning is definitely an option of fulfilling the tashbisu. No one says that burning is not called eliminating. There's a question whether you must burn it to exclude any other way of eliminating it, or whether you have other options as well. So just to make it clear that this Mishnah is not speaking to that machlokes. Okay. Now, sagt der Mishnah weiter. V'oid amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda here is telling us something that was done in the Beis HaMikdash that helped the Yidden that lived around there, helped them know exactly what time it was. And what did they do? Shtei chalois shel toida pesulois. They took 2 chalois of the carbon toida that were invalidated. And before we go on, a carbon toida, which is a subcategory from a carbon shlomim, has a unique din, and that is that shlomim could be eaten 2 days and 1 night. We had this in the beginning of Pesachim. A carbon toida, which is a shlomim, and it's eaten also by the owners in the Yerushalayim, but it only can be eaten for the day that it was sacrificed and that night, Yom Valayla. On top of that, the carbon toida came along with 40 loaves of bread. They were divided into 4 types of loaves. 10. 10 were chametz. The other 30 were not chametz. From each one of these types, you would give 1 challah to the kohen. Now you, the owner, you have 36 chalois left, and you only had 1 day and 1 night to eat it. Many people say that the source of making a su'udas hoida'ah comes from the carbon toida. That's the source. Because when you have kachim that have to be consumed in a relatively small amount of time, so for example, by the carbon Pesach, many people were counted on the same carbon because you have to finish. You can't have noiser. If you have 36 loaves of bread, just think about it. How much bread can you eat? If you only have 1 day and 1 night, that obliges you to invite more people to join your celebration for whatever it is that you were giving thanks to God. The arba tzrichim lohoidos. But coming back over here, as the Gemara is going to point out, that since carbon toidam was the only private carbon in the Beis Hamikdash that had some of it chametzik, therefore none of a toida was allowed to be brought on Pesach. Not only that, a carbon toida wasn't even brought out of Pesach, even though theoretically, if you bring a carbon toida in the morning, you can eat the chametz until the Zmani Surah, but you're never allowed to do that. If the Torah gives you 1 day and 1 night, then you can't offer the carbon at a time that you don't even have that 1 day and 1 night. So when was the last time that people can bring a carbon Torah? On the 13th. On the 13th, correct? And since so many people need a chaparain, because you tell a person, Mikan lahaba, you can't bring it until after Pesach. So there were so many carbon toidas that were brought on the 13th that it was inevitable that some of the breads became invalidated because of lina. That's what the Gemara is going to explain later. So they used to have invalidated, in other words, the day that the 13th, you needed to eat it on the 13th and oidla abba asar. But in the morning of the 14th, there were leftover chalois, and they would take some of them to make some use of it. And they were munachos al gav ha'istaba. We'll learn again details in the Gemara exactly where the istaba was, but they put it on a very high top covering of the benches that we had lined up over there. In other words, it was in a very visible place. And that was the siman. Kol's mancha munachos, whenever both of these chalois were there, then everyone knew it's not even the zman isar achila midrabanan. Kolo am oichlon. You can eat chametz if you want to. Nitla achas. So they would send a shliach bezdin to remove one. When did they remove one? That was Lashitas Rabbi Yehuda. That was b'chamesh toilin. Toilin doesn't mean that it's asur b'hana, but toilin means it's asur b'achila. And they knew toilin, which means lo yoilchin. You no longer can eat chametz, but you're not obligated to burn it. You could burn. You're not obligated. But lo sarfin. Once they retook the second one off, that means it's the beginning of the 6th hour, and it's chila kol ha'am sarfin. So that's Rab Meir and that's Rabbi Yehuda. And now we're going to learn a third opinion. The third opinion differentiates between chulin and truma. Says Rabban Gamliel Oimer, chulin, indeed, I, like Rabbi Yehuda, hold that they can only be eaten up until on the end of the 4th hour. In other words, he's taking the chamur dik opinion, not like Rabbi Meir. However, when it comes to truma, since there is a prohibition of ruining truma and kachim, by adding exeda, that's the way it always works. You're machman on one hand, normally it's makel on something else. So if you're going to say, you can't eat truma already from the 5th hour, that's a disrespect to the truma. Because what's going to end up happening with this truma? Truma has to be consumed. If you can't eat it, you're going to end up burning it. We're not allowed to destroy truma. So therefore, truma kol chamesh. Here, Rabban Gamliel holds like Rabbi Meir. Yeah, people make a mistake with 1 hour. They don't make a mistake in 2 hours, not as much as, and therefore you only have to burn chametz dika truma like Rabbi Meir from the beginning of the 6th hour. Now let's begin the sugya chavna. I don't know how much far down we're going to go because not to break it, but now, like we mentioned, so we have a Mishnah here in Pesachim. The Machloikes Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is all about how much of a mistake in time do people make that justifies either 1 hour midrabanan or 2 hours midrabanan. And now we're going to learn a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that's speaking about another topic, but it's also very much time related. So Tanan Hassan, a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. You have 2 Eidim, and they're testifying here in a capital case. And the first thing you have to do is you have to do the 7 chakiros, like we mentioned. We'll learn a lot about this also on Daf Yud Beis. The 7 chakiros were 7 standard questions, which you ask each witness separately, and that will ascertain the time and the place where the event that they are testifying about took place. And it's interesting when you come to the time So what happens if there's a discrepancy? So the rule is if there's a discrepancy, so then their testimony is invalidated. That's it. But there are certain discrepancies that can be explained. And if they can be explained, it's not called a discrepancy. It's not called, they're not contradicting each other. It's not called a divergent testimony. So here will be an example. One person says that the event that he's testifying about took place the second day of the Yiddish month. And the other one said that it happened on the third date. We're speaking about the day of the Chodesh. Says the Mishnah, Eidusan Kayemes. Why Eidusan Kayemes? Because since, like Rashi adds, they gave the same weekday, no one confuses the weekday. Monday is Monday, Tuesday is Tuesday. But since the days of the month depend on when the Beis Din was Mekadesh the Chodesh, and it could be, says the Mishnah, so it's common that people won't have the right date, but it's not divergent. One guy didn't know when Rosh Chodesh was. One person thought Rosh Chodesh was a day earlier, was on the day of Ibur. Means the 30th was not the 30th. The 30th was the first day. So if that would be the case, then today is already the second. Today is the third, because it began a day earlier. The other person thought no, that the prior month had 30 days, and then the next day was day number 1. So therefore, he's only 2 days into the month. That's not a contradiction. However, Echad Omer b'Shloisha of the month, the third of the month, the Echad Omer b'Hei, and one person says it was the 5th day of the month. That's already Eidus B'Teil. All right, you don't say, maybe this person already didn't know when last month was Rosh Chodesh and this month Rosh Chodesh. Ad kedei kach we don't say. We accept a mistake on 1 month, and also note that the Mishnah doesn't give you a time in middle of the month. The Mishnah is medayik by giving you a day earlier on in the month, the second, the third. It's so early in the month that shayach that a person will have the wrong date. Now the Mishnah continues regarding the time of the day, which is that part that's negeya to our sugya. By the end of the narrow line, the last narrow line. They also ask what time of the day, second hour of the day. And the other person says that the same event happened, third hour of the day. So there's a discrepancy of 1 hour. So the Mishnah says, now we're learning now Shitas Rabbi Meir, Eidusan Kayemes. Eidusan Kayemes. Now it sounds Kabbalic. It sounds perfect like our Mishnah. We're going to leave this for the next year, because first we're going to have to learn Abaya, and we're going to have to learn Rava, and there's different ways, Girsas, and there's so many different ways of learning the Mishnah. After we will clarify everyone's opinion, then we'll bring it back here to Pesachim. Hold on. Again, it sounds like if there's a 2-hour discrepancy, so then Rabbi Meir doesn't subscribe that there will be such a mistake. No one makes a mistake in 2 hours, and therefore, yes, Eidusan B'Teila, right? What's the Bach over here? Eidusan B'Teila. And he takes out the words Divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay. Weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eidusan Kayemes, that a 2-hour discrepancy could be attributed to human error. It's like they're not contradicting each other. They may eat that it's the same time. You thought it was at the 7, and I thought it was at 9 a.m. However, when do we tolerate the 2-hour discrepancy? That is, if that 2-hour discrepancy was on the first half of the day. So the 3rd hour of the day or the 5th hour of the day. But the 5th hour of the day, right, 11 a.m. And the other one is already going to the afternoon. The sun is on the other side of the sky. It's only at 2 hours. No, even here, Rabbi Yehuda says, Eidusan B'Teila. And he gives the reason is because Shabbat Chama b'Mizrach, Ubesheva, right? Even in the beginning of the afternoon, we just had again early in Pesachim the lashon that we have of the walls getting dark, because at the moment the sun goes even just a little bit to the west, so then the eastern side of the wall is already dark, even before the shade hits the ground. That people don't make a mistake. Ubesheva Chama is b'Mairav. So is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. And before people jump, we're going to stop over here because it's one big hemshech. First, we're going to have to better clarify the Mishnah over there in Sanhedrin, and then we're going to bring it back. We're going to bring it back over here. I just want to mention that we don't paskin like Rav Meir. But Rav Meir has a much lesser amount of time confusion. Rabbi Yehuda says that people have a greater discrepancy. I'm just saying maybe we had in Eruvin Yud Gimel, we had the concept that the Chaveir of Rav Meir, they were unable to be La'amoid al Soif Datoi. We see he went very deep. The deeper a person is, the less of such mistakes you make. Now, I'm not speaking about Rav Meir himself, but when a person is a very deep person, when you are in their presence, it also elevates your depth. So when Rav Meir looked at the people, that's a sikh of the Rebbe Chelik Tezayin and Yisroi, that when Moshe Rabbeinu felt that he can judge the people from the morning until night, why did he not know what his father-in-law knew? Is because whenever Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Yidden, they were standing in front of him, and they were on a much higher level because they were standing in front of him. And therefore, he felt that the people of a greater stature, their issues are talking more serious issues. But the things that are less significant, the moment they came into his presence, automatically were resolved. Once people project, people see in others what they see in themselves. Rav Meir, because of his depth, made less mistakes, maybe. And Rabbi Yehuda gave you already gave you more frame of making them as people make greater mistakes. And we'll see 1 hour, 2 hours, and again, we'll see later, God willing, how the Mishnah in Sanhedrin aligns perfectly with the Mishnah here in Pesachim. To be continued.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.